Yeah, so welcome. So nice to have you. I'm very excited because we've got such lovely, colourful dress on. And the people who are watching the video, they will be able to see it. But if you aren't watching the video and you're listening, then I highly recommend going to the movie and having a look because Liz is looking so, I don't know, it's just making me feel really happy.
Thank you.
So
Thank
don't
you. Definitely all about dopamine dressing, wearing colours and vibrant things to boost my mood.
yeah. So my first question that I always ask everyone to open up is, would you class yourself as a creative person? And what does creativity mean to you?
I think for me, until quite recently, I didn't think of myself as a creative person.
Mm.
I think kind of going back to school, I was very much kind of traditionally academic. I loved writing essays. I'm such a nerd. I really favoured those kind of, like English and history and those sorts of subjects. And truthfully, I wasn't very good at kind of the art and the textiles and music and the more typically creative subjects. And I think at school, in a way, you are kind of pigeonholed into like you're academic, you're sporty, you're creative, and you are kind of siloed into quite rigid groups. So until, yeah, probably, 3 or 4 years ago, I didn't think of myself as a creative person. And I think creativity for me is the ability to express myself or express yourself in whatever medium you think. So I think for me, kind of going back to dressing colourfully and dopamine dressing, that's how I express my creativity. And that's how I do now see myself as a creative person, although I didn't initially.
Yeah. Well, what was the point where you started getting into fashion and things like that? Because you do sustainable fashion content creation and things that you friend who's not
Yeah.
familiar with you.
Yeah, that's right. I think kind of my love of fashion started at a very young age. Like we had a huge dressing up box when I was younger, and I would drag my younger sister, my younger cousins into them, and we would put on like dance shows, which unfortunately we do have videos of, and I have watched those, and that is mildly traumatizing to watch. But seeing how bossy young Liz was, like bossing around my younger cousins, that, I loved like putting on the clothes and, putting on like makeup, all the different shoes. And I think that that's something that as like a really young child, I enjoyed. And I then think kind of during my teenage years, I was very much, getting pocket money and spending it in like Topshop and Urban Outfitters and H&M and the kind of typical high street and fast fashion retailers. And then it wasn't until 2020 that I made this connection of actually how damaging the fashion industry is, not only for the environment and kind of the overconsumption that it drives, but also the impact that that has on the people making our clothes. So I kind of reached this point where I was like, I love fashion, I love clothes, it's how I express myself and kind of my creativity, but also the people and planet are paying quite a high price for my enjoyment of clothes. That doesn't seem right. That doesn't align with what my values are. So I sort of I said to myself, I'm not going to buy from fast fashion. And that was sort of just over 5 years ago. And I've been going charity shopping, on resale apps. I get lots of clothes from family members, clothes swaps, all of these sorts of things that I can still be creative and still have lovely clothing that I like to wear, but without that cost.
Yeah. Do you feel like there's an element of it being less stressful if you're kind of shopping in that way? Because I know for me personally, I remember being younger and going to West Key and New Look was downstairs and there were all these really bright lights in there. And my mum would make us cycle to town if we wanted to go shopping. And I remember coming back and didn't have anything. Even though I didn't want something, I didn't come back with a new shiny like piece of clothing or something. And I just remember feeling really annoyed and angry. And I feel like it's slightly different with charity shops because it's kind of a bit more of an adventure and exciting, isn't it? You go in there to see what's there, not with the, I need this thing and it's going to look exactly like that.
Yeah.
I don't know. This is different way, different experience.
I completely resonate with that. I think that was exactly my experience of kind of going into town, and I felt almost like compelled to buy things because, yeah, you'd go into New Look and Topshop and various places, and there would be like whatever's trending that season, whether it was like the jeggings phase or like do you remember the geek tops? I don't know. It was a kind of, yeah, yeah, they're like fake pockets. Yeah, that I remember wearing jeggings, a geek top, like the fake glasses, and like this like sparkly hat kind of thing. It was a choice. It was interesting. Clearly, creative in my own way at that time. But it was kind of like, well, that's what everyone's wearing, and that's what people are. I kind of started using Instagram at that age, and like Tumblr and various social media sites were kind of like popping up a bit more. So I think not only were you seeing trends within your peer group, but also online a lot more as well. And I think that makes you compelled to feel like you have to buy things. Whereas on the flip side, obviously the opposite of fast fashion, slow fashion, it's very much what do you want? I have things in my wardrobe that I've worn for years. And I still love them because they're pieces I love and they align with my personal style rather than it's in at the moment and then it's not and then it's back in again. And you kind of reject those trend cycles. And I think that it feels a lot more authentic. And who doesn't love going through a charity shop like £1 bin and seeing what amazing things you can find in there? Because I love that. That's my dopamine kick.
And it takes with its imagination, doesn't it? Because you can start putting things together with what you've already got and working out outfits, which I'm not good at, I'm gonna lie. My mum's really good at charity shop shopping. Find something amazing. Oh, I just know, I don't know what it is. I got really into sustainable fashion brands. I guess I approached the slow fashion and the sustainable fashion more in a just buying less in general.
Yeah.
And I'm really fussy about the materials that I wear. But I try to buy from places that are just, yeah, aligned with my values as well. But for sure.
Do you know what? It does take time, but I think the point you said there about just buying less overall is like the main thing. Not only, saving yourself money, but also like environmental impact, just actually buying less, even if you're still buying from, fast fashion or kind of high street brands. The fact that you're buying less and consuming less is already like a massive thing. And I think that for me, kind of within my own journey, I had this mindset of overconsumption. I wasn't kind of a prolific shopaholic, but I definitely was someone that would like save up Christmas money or, birthday money when I got a job at the weekend for the first time, kind of save that money into buying clothes. So I did consume a lot more than I needed to, completely truthfully. And I think that when I then switched to buying from secondhand or kind of prioritizing that slow approach, I then still shifted that mindset. So I would still kind of look on Depop for hours and I would buy loads of things from Depop because I hadn't made that mindset shift really. It was still, I need to buy clothes, I need to keep going. And I think now, kind of 5 years into that journey, it's very much like I buy things if I actually need them or I know that I will wear them 30 plus times, not just because it's a trend.
Where did you first find out that that was a thing? Like, did you see someone else doing it and you kind of, it resonated with, find it a different
Yeah, I think that so it was sort of just as we went into the lockdown in 2020
way?
where I made that connection of, oh, well, I'm not going out as much. I was at uni at the time, I'm not going out and seeing people. So I stopped buying as many clothes. So I was like, so am I buying the clothes for myself or for other people? So I kind of made that shift. But kind of going back nearly like a decade before, I remember being in a geography class and we learned about something called the Rana Plaza disaster. I don't know if, yeah. So over 1,000 garment workers were killed in Bangladesh in a factory that was making clothes for the likes of Primark and H&M's, etc. And I feel like I kind of reconnected with learning that because at the time I was completely like astounded that that was the cost of the clothes I was wearing, but I still kept buying. So I think during 2020, when I had that little bit more time and I was at home and kind of studying from home, I was able to look into things a bit more and research. And that's where I kind of found a lot of other people talking about it, like particularly on Instagram. So I kind of connected with people and found like a really great community of other people who were also documenting like their outfits of the day and, how sustainable they were, or, oh, I've just bought this from Depop, or I'm listing I've done a wardrobe clear out and I'm listing on eBay. And that's kind of where I've found that community and kind of grown a little bit from there.
That makes sense. That was how I first found out about being vegan being a thing as well. I'm looking at videos. I was like, can give this go. I think it was like a 30-day
Yeah.
trial test, challenge yourself kind of thing. And
Nice.
and it didn't really, it just feels good in your body, doesn't it, to make those decisions for yourself, but also thinking of like a bigger picture, like you say, with community and the choices that you make having a wider impact.
Definitely. So you're vegan?
And it was,
Yeah.
I was for bad when I say vegan for 8 years. Well, I lived in Bristol. Um, and it was exciting because there were lots of places where you could go in Bristol to, try different foods, and I got really into cooking at that time. But I remember coming across a whole thing where people would ask if you were strict vegan or just vegan. Like, what does that? Surely if you're vegan or you're not vegan.
Yeah. Strict vegan. I'm like, what's the differentiator? Did he mean like lifestyle as well? It's just food or?
Mm.
Hmm.
Yeah, because that's another thing. You can have your eating habits with vegan principles, and then you can also go into the fashion side. So you stop wearing leather and
Yeah.
buying, I don't know, even down to your shoes with glues and apparently have animal products in it. Yeah, it can be quite tricky, but I got more into delving into the brand values communicated at that point, because then I was really like, okay, there are brands that just don't bother at all. Then you get brands which are kind of trying to do a little bit something, and then you get brands that are really committed. And yeah, it's like a community thing as well. Like you said, I found if you ever use the search engine, I think it's called Good.
Good on you. Yeah, that's really good. Yeah.
And lots of posts on there, and it changed the way that I dress.
And I think that's it when you have something that like good on you that can show you a physical kind of really tangible rating of like, actually this company's not doing good enough, or this company's starting to think about it. I think that's really impactful, because most of the time I think the thing with clothes is we wear them all the time. We're wearing them every day. Well, hopefully most of us are wearing them every day. And, it's a lot of the way that we express ourselves and express our creativity and our values. But actually, if those clothes aren't aligning with your values, then that feels like such a disconnect. And I think it's something a lot of people don't think about. And I think the conversation's starting to gain a bit more traction now. There's a lot more content creators thinking about these things, talking about it, documentaries coming out. But I think still people don't make that connection. And I think, yeah, something like Good on You is a great way of it being quite easy to just pop a brand's name in and get something quite sort of comprehensive, but also actionable, that you don't have to do loads of research yourself, which I think feels quite overwhelming for people.
Yeah, that was definitely, I felt like I was researching all the time and going to like dead ends. I was like, I don't know, it's not good enough. I can't buy that.
Mm.
Yeah.
And then it makes you feel guilty, I think sometimes is a difficult thing with sustainability and sustainable fashion is, do you then get to the point where you're like, I'm not sustainable enough? Like I try and champion sustainability as much as possible, but I do still have a car and I do drive. I mean, I really try and minimize it for journeys where I can't take public transport or I can't walk, but I still have a car, things like that. It's where do you draw that line? And I think trying to be imperfect, but making those strides, and if we can all do that collectively, I think that's the approach that I like to take. I don't think it's always realistic in the system that we live in for everyone to never ever buy new clothes and to never, you know, eat meat sometimes. Even though I am vegan, I acknowledge that that's, sometimes difficult for people. But it's, yeah, how can you make it realistic in your own life?
Yeah. Is that something that you try to achieve with your content creation then? Is it kind of building a community where people can, I guess, slightly educational, kind of showing people how fun charity shop shopping can be and the exciting part of it, but also the practical side where you're kind of considering what the values that you hold are. So I was
Mm.
thinking that you are trying to communicate.
Yeah, I think so. I try to do that, and I think that it's quite easy with something like social media to see like the great side of, how kind of glamorous things can look with putting outfits together. And I think it's important to show the realism behind it. So, I have like a notes app on my phone and it's sort of, I call it like my charity shop hit list, which maybe sounds a little bit drastic, but it's basically items that I have identified in my wardrobe that I need. So, for example, at the moment, I don't have any black jeans and I really want a pair of black jeans because I think that's such a staple. I don't have any at the moment. So that's on my list. And until I find the right pair, I will not buy a pair of jeans. And I have that with a few other items. So I think that being able to talk about that and be quite honest with people that you might go into lots of charity shops or you might spend a long time looking on a resale app and you might not find the item you want. I think it reminds people that it's about that slow fashion approach. Um, but that said, I do think that on sort of resale apps, if people aren't sort of ones to go through charity shops for fun, like me, and maybe have too much time on their hands and want to delve through the £1 kind of bargain bins, you can actually just search what you're looking for. So if you love like the Topshop mum jeans, for example, you can put like Topshop mum jeans, black, size 12, and find those items on there. So I think there's little ways that you can make sustainable slow fashion fit your lifestyle if you're someone that doesn't have the time or the energy to be kind of like me, having it on your notes app for months at a time and looking for a piece of clothing. But I think being able to communicate that to people is important and goes against kind of the like one click order that we're used to or the buy now, get it tomorrow. It's quite difficult and I think does require a mindset shift.
How does it work when it comes to running? Because you do a lot of gym and running. You're quite active, it seems like, from your social media anyway.
Yeah.
Um, so how do you find brands and clothing for that type of thing? Do you find that in charity shops, or is that or specifically online when you need them?
Mm, good question. I think it's a bit of a mixture. I think that I do have lots of sort of workout sets that are secondhand, um, particularly from like Depop and Vintage. So, for example, like Gymshark's a really well known brand that does sort of a lot of different workout equipment. Um, if I am looking for something, I can type that into Depop, and a lot of the time it's new with tags. Like someone's probably not actually worn it; they've maybe got it for a Christmas present or missed the kind of delivery period, or sorry, returns period, and they can't get it back. And you're like,
That grinds me.
that is yes, it's like if you have 30 days and then people are like, "What do I do with it?" So and they put it onto Depop and things. So that's a way that I kind of approach that in a slightly more sustainable mindset. There are some, sort of more sustainably made clothing items out there. So I'm thinking of, there's kind of Tala, there's Ginger Bees, and there's a few others as well that you sort of don't use basically plastic in their items. But I think it's quite difficult when it comes to people who are doing kind of more high performance training. Like, I'm not going to say that's me, I'm not an athlete, but I did train for a half marathon last year. And that's something that I bought new running shoes and I bought running shoes that were sort of the best quality for what I needed for them to be and to be kind of good trail running shoes, to be kind of a good all rounder. Could I have made a more sustainable choice? Probably. But for what I needed them to be and for that kind of higher performance, I bought an item that I knew would be durable and would last and would fit the purpose. So, as much as I will always endeavor to buy something secondhand or buy something more sustainably, I think in a situation like that, I did make that decision. And it kind of, I sat with it for a while and I was like, is that really hypocritical? Just bought some new running shoes. They're probably made of plastic and who knows else what, nylons and various different things. But then I still have them, a year on. They're really good quality. They mean that when I run, my feet are protected well. And hopefully there possibly are some other brands out there that are more sustainable for kind of higher endurance kind of sport things. But then you think about the price tag as well. So there's all of these considerations. And I basically told myself I'll wear them until I can't wear them any longer. And also to have some self-compassion as well, but you can't always be perfect.
Yeah. So, and you're also a model. Yeah.
I am.
Are you quite particular about the brands that you work with? Do they have to align with your values, or is it kind of accept things when you want to do them? It's less about the slow fashion and sustainability angle.
So I'm very particular about the brands that I will work with. And truthfully, I suppose that's a personal sacrifice, which maybe sounds kind of a bit grandiose to say, like, I've sacrificed myself for this. But I think that's, for me, it's about my values most importantly. So I think it would be very hypocritical of me and it wouldn't sit well with me to, for example, accept a campaign with Primark. I'm really like slating them right now, but Primark or Shein or, insert other brands. They're the ones you always think of. And I'm like, okay, that just is the complete opposite of what I talk about and what my values are. For me, if I were to work on a campaign with the likes of Shein, that completely undermines my values personally, but also, I guess, my brand in a way of what I stand for, what my credibility is, what I care about. But also, again, if I were hypothetically to accept a campaign with someone like that, I would accept that money knowing that I'm getting paid probably quite a good rate for being kind of part of that campaign, knowing that people further down within kind of the food chain almost of that company are getting paid next to nothing for the clothes that I would be wearing and kind of making look glamorous and producing. And that's not even thinking about, the fact that lots of these brands do actually steal from small designers. They use dyes and toxins that are really awful. So generally speaking, it's a no-go for me. Like that just doesn't fit with my goals. And I prefer to work with kind of, there's charities that I've worked with, kind of smaller designers, independent creators, smaller businesses, or other kind of larger brands, but that are actually prepared to put their money where their mouth is when it comes to sustainability.
So, what do you think makes the process of dressing like creative and engaging for some people and not others? And I know this might be quite hard to answer because you obviously do find it creatively engaging, and it might be hard to differentiate between the way you feel about it and the way someone else might. I guess it's just, don't know. I think it's a really interesting process that people go through. And I don't know, it's like a confidence thing as well, like wearing your personality in an outward way. Whereas I feel like some people, their creativity is kind of tucked away a bit more, and it's like, I don't know, in themselves, or it comes up through something that they've created. So a painting or a photograph. But I think there's something really lovely and, I don't know, exciting about wearing different things and wearing colors and having the confidence to go out into the world and have people that you don't know necessarily see your personality in this kind of, I don't like, extroverted way.
Yeah. I think that's such a good question. And I think that you're right. It's kind of, there is an element of vulnerability when you're wearing something and perhaps it's a little bit out there, whether it's a texture or colors or something that you think actually might get people looking at you or isn't kind of fitting with what the trends are. And I think it's really difficult, but for me, it always comes back to finding what your personal style is and what that means to you. So, going back to again when I was a teenager, I was kind of wearing all sorts of random different things because you're trying to fit in and you're trying to see what the trends are and trying to keep up with your peers. I think that at that time I was very insecure about the clothing I wore, and I didn't have a lot of personal confidence because I didn't have a style or I didn't know what worked for me. I didn't know, thinking about what I felt comfortable in, what actually flattered me and what made me feel good about myself. And I think the difference for me now, and hopefully is something that people who maybe don't have that confidence, is really trying to experiment to find what your personal style is. Because we've all got, the jeans or the lovely dress or whatever it may be where you wear it and you're like, yes, I'm a boss. Like, this is amazing. You might put like your blazer on and you're like, I can absolutely smash that meeting at work. Or you've got like that kind of power suit mentality. I think we've all hopefully got that kind of item that makes you feel comfortable. It's a color that really works for your skin tone. It maybe feels really nice on what your body type is. And I think if you can find what your personal style is, then that helps you feel a lot more confident. So even now, sometimes I wear things that maybe would be quite different to what the trends are at the moment. I feel so much more confident, even if people were to look at me and maybe they think I look strange, that's absolutely fine. Versus when I was younger, kind of flitting between trends because it was almost an insecurity. So I think that for me is like finding what your style is. And I think being honest as well with the fact and open to the fact that that can change and that it's also okay to like trends as well. Like, there were cowboy boots. That was like a big trend, for example. There's so many things at the moment. There was like coastal grandpa was a trend. And then there was, what was it? It's like mob wife aesthetic, like all these different names that TikTok creates. And I'm like, wow, this is so overwhelming. But it's also okay to take inspiration from those trends as well. And that's fine. And I think kind of dipping your toe into those trends, quite a nice way to see what your personal style is. But again, not kind of getting swept up by it and neglecting what yourself is. Like, for example, the mob wife aesthetic, that was kind of quite almost, like bright lipstick, like the big fur coats, like a leathery jacket, that kind of vibe. That's absolutely not how I would dress. I wouldn't feel confident wearing that, for example. That's not how I would represent myself. But other people might like that and that might fit with them, and that's okay too if that helps you discover your style and who you are.
Quite theatrical.
Completely, yeah, very theatrical.
I've never put those two things together actually, but I just had to like go brain glitter.
I love that. Yeah, like click together is very theatrical and it's very kind of, I suppose when you put clothes on, you're dressing for the day. You're kind of dressing, it's like your armor in a way. It's like how I'm facing the world. Like when I go to work, if I've got a really important meeting, I've got this yellow, of course I like colors, so of course it's yellow. It's like a yellow blazer. And that's almost like my power dressing. I'm like, cool, I've got this on. I look the part, I look smart, I feel good. If I'm working from home, I'm more likely to wear comfy joggers, leggings, a jumper. We have these different ways of dressing for different situations. And I think it is quite theatrical in that sense. And I've never made that connection either, but it is kind of dressing for your day. How are you feeling for the day? I want to feel like it's spring outside because the sun's out and we're having this conversation. I'm putting on something colorful that makes me feel bright and bubbly, or, oh, I'm just at home, answering some emails for today. I'll just chuck on like some joggers and a top. I think it's a performance.
It goes back to the mindset thing that we were talking about as well. I think it's kind of programming or taking control of your inner world before you go out into the world, because you get dressed at home, really, right? So you're kind of setting yourself up, like you said, setting yourself up for the day. And don't. It feels like almost like a hack. Dressing in something that feels comfortable but also confident.
Completely.
This is how I'm choosing to show up today.
Mm. I think so. And like how you dress it's one of the first things you sort of notice about people. You see someone's kind of physical appearance and you might think, okay, they're tall, they're short, their hair's curly, their hair's straight, these sorts of things. But also the clothing, I think that it does show your personality, or it shows something about you, or how you're facing the world. And I think that's why there's this idea of kind of power suits or power dressing or dopamine dressing, wearing lots of oranges and yellows and reds and kind of bright colors. It really helps you feel bright and colorful, or it at least can contribute to that. I do try and do that if I've been, say, working from home for a long time and I've just been chucking on like whatever. I'm like, let's wear something colorful today. Like, let's get that little bit of a boost to feel happy and positive.
My like marketing brains just kicked in. I'm like, I feel like there could be a really cool like uh, dopamine dressing challenge. Maybe that's what I do a thing. Like a week, you choose things to wear that are a bit more colourful than you normally would wear, and just challenge yourself.
Oh, I like that.
Just a little bit.
Yeah. I love that because then it will be different to everyone, like what is different for you and the colours that you don't usually go for and seeing how that makes you feel. I love that. Launch it. Fabulous.
Take love.
I love this. Yeah, definitely. Watch this space. Hmm.
How do you get through the doubt if you ever kind of put an outfit on and it just doesn't feel right? I think it's stepping into the feeling over the mind stuff, isn't it? Like maybe not necessarily worrying about what other people think of it, but if it just doesn't feel right, you put something on. How do you kind of, I guess, shake off that feeling? Not only do you take the outfit off physically, but sometimes that feeling of just, I don't know, it's like inadequacy or doubt or I don't know. Just, I guess it's the opposite way of what we just talked about with the mindset is kind of how do you work through those feelings in yourself? With your height.
That's a good question. I wrote some notes on this for sure. I think I did, she says.
Forensic.
Did I write something about that? Hmm. Yeah. I've got a couple of a few thoughts on that. So your question was about if you're doubting the outfit that you've put on or doubting how you're looking, how do you get through that? I think it really does speak to having that sense of style and that confidence. I think is really important. But on a kind of personal level, I think I have always been someone that physically stands out anyway. So I am 6 foot. I grew up so I'm very tall, of course. I grew up in like a predominantly white area. I'm a person of color. When my hair's not in cornrows, it's usually like in quite a big afro. So I think physically I've actually always stood out quite a lot, which was quite difficult growing up, kind of as you're trying to navigate those teenage years, and probably did feed into why I was like, okay, let's buy the clothes everyone else is wearing because if there's something I can't change and I stand out about it, then at least I can control how I'm dressing and kind of assimilate a little bit more. And that's a way of like getting some of that control and trying to fit in a bit. And I think that it's something that it's confidence in myself then translates to other areas of life. So it's translated to clothing, if that makes sense. I think that it's hard, but I think going back to the point you made about it being quite theatrical, I think if you view it with that kind of mindset of like you're stepping into a costume, I think maybe that gives you a little bit more leeway to yourself to actually think, I put this costume on, maybe this isn't the costume for me, or that's not how I'm feeling today. Then you can take that off and kind of give yourself that grace to know that your kind of style and what you enjoy it can be quite transient, it can be quite fluid as well. Like in the summer, I'm more likely to wear brighter colours probably, and I'm more likely to wear something quite flowy and light, linens and cottons and various things. In the winter, you're more likely to hide away, big jumpers, fleeces. Like I love a fleece. Like so nice and cozy. And I think that seeing it as like clothing moments or as a production where you're stepping into something is probably quite a nice way of taking some of that pressure off. But equally as well, yeah, being someone I think that did always stand out, I feel like I'm now less afraid to stand out with my clothing because I think people are probably going to, look at me anyway because I'm quite tall or how my hair looks or, my skin color even on a kind of deeper level. Okay, cool. Look at me for how colorful my outfit is. I think it's almost like it's you accept that in a way. But that's quite kind of a personal response to it.
Yeah, I remember actually, because that was the first place I saw you. We didn't meet officially, but we were both at the your colorism event.
Yes. October, yeah.
Yeah. And I remember I was sitting next to you and we didn't know each other, but I remember seeing your earrings. Those just are so sunny and it's just up and I was like, "Oh, she's got some confidence. In the this like in the superficial way, like being with like you said, being willing to stand out a bit and just step into your power.
I think that's such a thing that I'm still working at. And I think that that is kind of that's like personal and self-discovery that comes, I think, I guess, with age, with experience, with doing lots of things that push you out of your comfort zone. But I think I'm now a lot more comfortable with, yeah, with holding that space and being like, yeah, I take up space, whether that's like physically or metaphorically, but I'm here and this is how I want to express myself. So deal with it almost. But even with that, I'm like, oh,
Yeah. Okay, sorry. Uh, do you have any advice for people who would want to go into modeling or content creation themselves?
I think authenticity is a big thing. I think knowing what your values are and kind of knowing, I suppose to an extent, what your niche is, but really kind of sticking with that. So I started off my account talking mainly about kind of clothing and, my secondhand outfits and clothes swaps, etc. But I think for me, it's kind of grown a little bit more holistically now. So yes, the clothing is a big part of it, and that's a big part of how I represent myself and express myself. It's also that kind of bigger picture of sustainability, but also how well-being fits into the two as well. So I think knowing like you can have kind of a niche, but don't be afraid to go out of it. I think people like seeing that authenticity because particularly when it comes to something that's like kind of a social justice issue or kind of sustainability, racism, you know, humanitarian law, whatever your thing is, and those all things I talk about, I think knowing that that's kind of a lot of it's a bigger topic. It doesn't just exist in a silo. Clothing, for example, it's not just about the environmental impact, but for me, it's also about the human rights and kind of the labor laws and how we can impact people. So being kind of not afraid to talk about a range of things, but at the same time, almost contradictory of me, but having that niche and kind of that focus, I think, is quite important because it will draw people to you. And but then again, underpinning that, I think it's your values. So for me, regardless of how my page has kind of taken a bit of a different route, I suppose, talking more about like well-being and mental health a little bit more in recent months, I will still always remain at that kind of ethical principle and having that as something that underpins all of the work I do. So knowing what that is, I think can help you hone in a lot more. And then I think because of that, you then will attract brands and collaborations and people that really resonate with you because you've got a strong value set and that's really clear to your audience and to potential brand partners.
Where do you how do you establish the boundaries? Because, like you say, your content creation is kind of more holistic and you have it's about well-being and physical activity and then fashion as well. So I feel like it's you as a person and it's your actual life, isn't it? You're not on a reality TV. So how do you establish those boundaries of when you make content and when you choose to just keep something within your own sphere and your own life without putting it on social media?
That's a really interesting question. I think something that I've been thinking about a bit more recently because I've been thinking about this well-being and mental health element. So, I mean, I started working for a mental health charity around a year and a half ago. So that's really been at the forefront of my mind, I suppose, since then. And what does that well-being mean and how can I balance those things, trying to work full time, but also trying to do a bit of content and dipping my toe into different projects. It can feel quite overwhelming, but I'm someone that loves a plan. I'm a color coder as well as dressing colorfully. I love to color code like my Google Calendar, for example. This is it. I'm the ring binder girl. I'm there with the colors. I love I am someone that does really like a plan and kind of I think to be able to manage these things that helps me to be able to dedicate time. But I think in terms of your question about creating content, that's quite difficult because you could be just eating breakfast and you're like, oh, I need to take a photo of breakfast, or out on a date with my partner and thinking, okay, I should take a photo of it. I think for me, as long as it feels, sounds a bit kind of meta, but as long as it feels right, then I will I will take those photos. Like, for example, I don't really post like family members unless they're cool with that, or I wouldn't post friends who have like a private account. If their account's public, then that's okay. We'll have that discussion. Is that okay to post that photo? But if they have that kind of public facing account, then I think that's different. But if it's someone who's kind of not someone that's online, like my partner, for example, doesn't have any social media. He recently like just deleted all social media, which I totally respect. And I think that's a great thing. And it's kind of like, you don't want to be out there. You don't want your face out there. You don't want to be a part of that. And that's really cool. You can be supportive of what I do, and then on that kind of note, I suppose it's making sure that you're not letting the content element like overtake your life. So I don't change anything about my life to make the content, if that makes sense. So if I'm taking a photo, it's like, oh, I genuinely did this thing. Maybe if you're taking a photo, you might like change the lighting slightly, but it is pretty much like, oh, that looked like a nice lunch. Maybe people will be interested to know that this is something that a vegan might eat at lunchtime, as an example. But that's kind of a roundabout way of saying, I suppose it does naturally bleed into lots of different areas. So it can be quite hard to have boundaries. And I think it's still truthfully something I'm trying to establish and work on, and what feels right. I think the luxury for me is that my account's like not a massive account at all. Like, I'm not someone that does this as my full-time job, as I have friends that do. So it's kind of ad hoc. It's like, do I have something cool to talk about today? Yeah, maybe people will be interested. Was it a quiet day at work? Maybe no one's interested. But also people might be interested, that's the reality. So yeah, really just kind of going with the flow.
Yeah, it's like feelings.
Definitely, yeah, following feelings is a good way of thinking about it. And, there'll be days where I'm like, I just don't feel like I'm in a great headspace and I don't want to talk to people. And that's fine. I don't owe that to anyone, and nor is anyone expecting you to show up to be talking about that. But there might be other times where, because I talk about kind of the mental health and wellbeing element, that's also quite interesting to share with people. The fact that you might often see me showing up in, feeling great, and I'm on a podcast today and I've done something really fun and I went out for lunch. But equally, there are days where I feel absolutely awful. I'm on my period with my wraparound hot water bottle, eating chocolate and not looking my freshest. And like, if that feels right to share, then I will share that, or maybe share that after the fact. But if that's not something I personally feel in the headspace to share with people, then I won't do.
Yeah, yeah, no, that makes complete sense. Do you have places in Southampton that you like to go for inspiration, I guess creative inspiration? Or is there certain shops you really want?
Oh, good question. There's so many gems. So I've lived in Southampton since 2018, but because I was a student initially, I feel like I was in a student bubble, so I didn't get to explore the city as much as I would have liked to. And then obviously we know what happened in 2020, so I feel like it's only in the more sort of recent years that I've actually explored the city a lot more. I love going to the Southampton Makers Market, where there's like this independent sellers. I love going to things like that. Yeah, so good. I love going to the Southampton Clothes Swap,
Oh,
which
yeah.
once a month. There's Flo's Vintage Market, which I really enjoy going to as well. All of these kind of independent sellers and various different things. I get lots of inspiration from being around people who are creative in a range of different ways. But I also love sometimes just like going into a cafe and just being, and like I'll take my book or take my reading book and kind of just like, not people watch necessarily, although I do love a good people watch, but kind of just be in a different environment and see if any ideas come to me, whether that's for content or whether that's writing something or thinking about outfits. So I think just being open is really important. But I think the kind of main thing over that for me is being outside. Like, I love that we have some great green spaces in Southampton. So for me, I mean, nearly every day I'll go for a walk, even if sometimes it's just a short walk, it's 10 minutes at lunchtime and I can't always fit in more. But on a day where it's really sunny, much like today, it's lovely to be able to go out. And I find that a really good time to have a bit of introspection, think about ideas. I'll like jot them down on the notes app on my phone if they come to me. But I think being connected and kind of quite grounded with nature is a big thing for me, like managing my well-being and mental health, but also that kind of creativity element too.
That's so interesting that you say about being outside because the episode 1 of this season on the podcast, I had my mum on as a guest and she runs a forest school.
Oh, that's
And
cool.
yeah, she was saying very similar things actually, just embedding yourself in where you live in terms of like getting outside. It kind of, I didn't, it was about early education with children, with elements of play and creativity in that sense. But I feel like there's a similar uh, overarching theme with it, with going down these different little branches that feel right to you and kind of not being, and I think I said to you about my quest of not being so much in my head and more in feeling before we started recording, that it's, I don't know, it's just this overarching thing of being creative with the way that you live, as well as creating a thing. Is that creativity within you to go about your life in the way that you want to do it and following these little paths that you're walking along and you're, oh my goodness, so this looks nice. So I feel like doing this today and just not being held prisoner, your body and in your mind.
Completely. I think that's exactly it for me. I'm kind of going almost full circle back to the beginning of like, are you creative? What does creativity mean to you? I think that's so key when thinking about experiencing outside or what that means to creatively redesign our lives and communities, even, is thinking about creativity doesn't just have to be doing the thing or creating the thing, as you said, making a product or painting. And of course, those things are part of that, but it's kind of broadening out that definition a lot more. And I think that's really something that I'm trying to get into and lean into a lot this year. But I love that your mum's so someone that loves being outside. I just think I find it kind of humbling in a way. Like if I'm really in my own head and I've been, looking at a screen all day and it's kind of like, okay, I'm answering emails, brilliant. It's really grounding to be like, wow, this is like the world around me and I'm just a small part of it. And I think that's quite nice to feel sometimes because it takes almost some of that power away from you. Whereas at work, you're like, oh my goodness, I need to respond quickly and I need to, it's deadlines, it's fast paced. To take away and be in that kind of slow living and follow paths where that's like literally or metaphorically like going down to spaces. I love that.
And that's actually just reminded me, your Instagram bio, you talk about soft living, don't you? So I wanted to ask you what that means in general, but also what it means to you. Because I feel like there's quite a nice kind of like feminine bit in the energetic sense. You have to be a woman to see this kind of thing.
I think for me, soft living is kind of that rejection of, I suppose, hustle culture. Like at its core, it's trying to move away from, you know, everything has to be tracked and there's targets and there's metrics and everything has to be very quantifiable, which I think many of us can probably relate to in our employment. You're based off of how many sales you make or how many followers there are or, how much money you make or you've brought into the company. I think a lot of the world we live in is very much kind of results based and it's like, tracked. And I've been kind of reading about soft living and what that means. And it's taking time and it's not putting pressure on yourself. So an example that I came across was it was sort of talking about how you can bring softness into everyday life. So I'm someone, I mean, I have like a smartwatch, so like I'll track my runs. Yeah. And I'll track a walk or a workout and things. But even just something as simple as just if you enjoy running or walking, going out there and not having to be right, this is my time where I've got to do 5K or plod, get it done. But actually, I've got this time, let's experience it. I don't have to have a podcast on. I'm not always having to learn. I can just be. And I think that's so key for me because I feel this kind of pressure that all the time I'm like, whilst I'm commuting, like, must be learning or like, let's use the time efficiently. And maybe I think some of that is probably a me thing, but I think it's also quite symptomatic of our society that it's like, are you working? Have you got a side hustle? What's your 5 to 9 after your 9 to 5? Like, what else are you doing? And whilst I find that really enriching, and I know before we started recording, we both said that we're people that like to have different projects on the go. I think it's quite exhausting to feel that you have to do that, and that's the pressure. I think sometimes it's lovely to just be, and that's what kind of that soft living is for me. It's how can I advocate for the causes that I care about, do the things that I want to do, live the life that I want to, but without as much pressure. And don't get me wrong, that's a work in progress because I feel like very conditioned to be like, as I say, hustle, 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 like use that time efficiently. But I'm really trying to lean into what feels right and what works for me in that moment.
It's almost like self-regulating.
Completely. Definitely. And like getting back to basics almost in a way before, not thinking again about, what's the metrics on this? How many people have liked this? Or, I appreciate at work it's quite difficult because that's often how many of us are assessed by those kind of really tangible, like quantifiable things. But okay, if that's your day job, but are there elements you can incorporate into your life? Can you just go for a walk because you feel like it? Or can you, read a book and not think, oh, I've got to have a reading goal for this year? If that works for you, that's okay. But I'm kind of trying to be like, I'll read what I read and I'll do what I do and what feels right. And actually, for most things in my life, if I do it today or tomorrow or next week, there's, no one's life is at stake, no one's harmed. It's the personal pressure you put on yourself to get things done.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh. Yeah, I can really, really relate with that.
Yeah.
I can't remember if I said it on the podcast or before we started recording, but with this heart over mind thing, it's quite difficult to tune yourself out of what you feel like you should do. And I don't know, I find myself like, I'll be really in feeling and do things like go to the sauna like I did the other day and go to a dance class, which is not usually my thing. But then I'll come back and in my safe space, I'm kind of starting this monkey mind thing where I'm like, what does this mean? And what should this do? And writing down stuff. So I started a gratitude journal. That's quite helpful. I can read it back and see what I was grateful for, obviously, but also what I was thinking and how I was making those decisions for myself and doing it in a way that feels authentic to me, like you said, rather than just doing things that feel like what you have to do. And the podcast this season has taken me ages to get to because it just felt too busy and I was not ready to do that just yet. So I'll do it when I feel like. And when things come together, I find when you allow yourself to just be calm and present and follow feeling, things kind of just arrive. It's the way that you need it to happen rather than you trying to force things all the time.
Completely. I think you're right. I think because it puts you in the right mindset to be able to take on those opportunities. And you're so right. If you force something, if you had started it, say, a few months before, and that was a time where you had loads of deadlines at work and lots happening, you wouldn't have the capacity to give to it. And actually, by waiting and intentionally saying, I'll come back to this when it feels right, you're actually then able to put your all into it and not feel like you're having to juggle. And I think that that's something that so many people, I know that, amongst like Gen Z and millennials, the amount of people that have like their side hustles and of course there's so many other reasons like economic reasons and that's kind of a different conversation. But I do think there is a pressure financially, but also kind of maybe socially as well, that you do lots of other things. And that is that's quite overwhelming. And if that's not authentic to you, then that's really quite difficult. So I think at the core, kind of soft living is about how can I just take it slowly and how can I almost kind of regulate my nervous system. And I catch myself doing that. Something that I've been challenging myself to do is, when you're at a traffic light, this is a really small thing, but you're at a traffic light, say there's no cars coming or the cars are a red light and you just walk across. I've been waiting until it actually is green for the pedestrians to cross. And that might sound like such a trivial example, but that for me is something I pinpointed the other day when I was going for a walk and I was like, that's just a small way I can be like, I've got an extra minute or, 30 seconds sometimes. But that's, I think, really like characterizes how we're like, go, 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 like walk across the road. And, sometimes that's quite unsafe to do so. It's like, just wait a minute, breathe, be, pause, and then do it. And I think if you can kind of take that and put that into other elements of your life, again, something that's work in progress for me, I think that that's really powerful. And I think you just feel that calmness a lot more and puts you in control of a situation which can sometimes feel quite uncontrollable when you've got work pressures and maybe family obligations. It puts you back in that kind of driving seat a little bit.
There is thing, and it's not on my list. So throughout our conversation, it's just been in my head to ask you because I really like astrology and star signs and stuff.
Cool.
Are you a Leo?
I'm not a Libra. I am an Aquarius.
Ah,
I don't know a lot about star signs, but I know that I'm an Aquarius. I don't know what that means about me. But do I give Libra vibes?
you do.
Yeah,
Libra is
interesting.
all about like balance, and it's like the symbol is the scales. There's the law element to it of like justice and harmony. Yeah. So
Okay.
what you would be.
Oh, my sister's a Libra actually, and we're quite similar. We're very similar, but very different. I wonder, yeah, her Libra influence possibly. Yeah.
Yeah, that was a complete sight.
No, I love that. I love that.
Let me go back to my list as what are you keeping from last year and what are you not recycling out of 2025?
Oh, I think the things that I'm prioritizing this year and kind of trying to lean into more in 2025 are thinking about that soft living element. So I think for me, it's something that I started towards the end of 2024, but going for a walk without listening to anything
Yeah.
and or driving without listening to anything, or sometimes, even in the shower, I'll put music on. I've been really trying to not overstimulate my mind and always have some kind of content consumed. I love podcasts, so I want a podcast as well. I love podcasts, I love music, I love all of those forms of media, but I think being more intentional about when and why I'm consuming, not just feeling that bombardment, like driving into work and like listening to a self-development podcast. Is that the best example? Maybe I just need some tranquility before I face the day of busyness or going for a walk on a lovely day and just hearing the bird song and hearing maybe it is the traffic and, all of these different sounds. So I think that's something that I started implementing a little bit in 2024, but I'd like to carry forwards into 2025 and I think is a little bit easier as the weather gets nicer and we come into kind of spring and things as well. Something that I'm definitely trying to leave in 2024, again, on the kind of spirit of kind of soft living and leaning into that more intentional lifestyle, is just feeling like I'm busy all the time. So I think the kind of that podcast and not consuming content element all the time is part of it, because I think that I realized I didn't have a lot of time where I'm just in my own head in kind of in a positive and intentional way where I'm just thinking and, the internal monologue's going. So that's something that I want to leave, but also on a kind of more physically busy note, and not seeing all of my spare time as actually free time that I could fill. So I think I'm someone that's like, oh, I must fill that time. If a friend wants to see me, let's book that in. Or how can I, take on another hobby or take on something else? And I've actually started like into my calendar putting in every other weekend where I'm like, no, that's a me weekend. Or maybe my partner and I will do something like quite relaxed cook together, go for a walk, but not seeing every element of time as something that can be filled. I think that's a big thing. And just having slow, calm. Again, she says trying, but I think that's kind of my focus on. I'm putting it out here so I can speak it into existence and have accountability.
No, that makes a lot of sense. I think it's easy to not realize how much we absorb from like external world things, either like you say, down to listening to music all the time. There's like those lyrics and what people are talking about, even if you're not consciously listening, it's kind of seeping in and then your mind starts going and it's like just turning off for a little while.
That's it. And letting your mind wander, because I love that actually being able to reconnect with time where you just go for a walk and you're like, what just comes into my mind? Oh, actually, something's coming up at work. It seems like I'm kind of stressed about that subconsciously, which I didn't realize about, or whatever it may be. I think, yeah, it's so important to have that downtime.
So, last question, because you kind of go between Southampton and Bath, don't you?
Yeah, that's
So, is there anything from Bath that you wish we had in Southampton? And that can be something creative or just something general or a brand or a shop or anything.
ooh, good question. Yeah, so I grew up just kind of outside of Bath. So Bath was like my go-to for shopping and, if you wanted to go out for food or something with friends, that was where I went. But I think there's a really good independent kind of like vintage market, vintage clothing scene in Bath that's kind of re-emerging. I think that that's something that I'd love to see more of in Southampton. I think, we've got like Beatnik, which is fantastic, and there's loads of great charity shops. There's things like the Clothes Swap, but I would love to see maybe like vintage pop-ups and things like I know, some cities have been using like the old Debenhams that closed down, for example, there's really big spaces like that, something like that being turned into like a secondhand emporium where there's different things that come in. This is me kind of spitballing random ideas now, but I think being able to have some spaces like that would be really important, and I would love it. I I think Bath has a lot of really good independent restaurants and cafes as well. I think Southampton does have that too, to be honest. Like there's so many great, especially like really good vegan cafes, like Cafe Thrive. Yeah, I have to mention that's like my favorite. It's kind of an obsession at this point. But I think there's some really great places but it's, it's hard at the moment for some of those retailers. But I think yeah, I mean, a lock-in, I think if there were more kind of vintage sellers, I think that would be really positive for people because I think that has almost a more glamorous approach than a charity shop, which I think there's still a little bit of stigma about shopping there. I think the vintage element would get more people into the sustainable fashion scene. And then once they're in there, I think it's easier to kind of get into other elements of it as well. So yeah, locking in vintage shops, that's the final answer.
No, yeah, I definitely agree. And just, we'll finish in a minute, but on the Debenhams point, that whole building being empty, I wish I don't know, just consulted with some local creative businesses or small businesses and used even just the windows or displays of something. So you could have had vintage, like Flo's vintage, you could have had it for QR code and do some like mannequin thing.
Completely, yeah. It's such a space that's like, oh, it could be amazing.
Yeah. And the old bank building at the bottom of Penn opposite the chapel that's like ruined. I never remember what it's called. But that building used to have Robin's Nest inside. And yeah, could be used for something great. A vintage piece. So, well, hopefully someone will come on the podcast and like it. Pose these ideas. Have you thought about it?
They're like, right, let me pitch this to you.
Maybe that's what we need. I think the pitch thing in Southampton. I think I saw something about them doing that, like the buildings that have been empty for 2 years and more. They were going to do pitches or something to make it a bit affordable to use that space for their business. But
Mm.
we will see how that unfolds.
Yeah, well, hopefully something productive comes from it 'cause it's such a shame to have that amazing, like, prime space not being used.
Yeah, and definitely mindset. Need a mindset.
Yes, we do. That's what we're about, mindset shift.
That's- Well, thank you so much for coming on. It's been really lovely to meet you and talk to you.
Likewise, thank you so much for having me.
No problem. Um, is there anything that you, is there any questions that we didn't touch on that you wanted to?
I feel like that was a really, like, it went by so quickly. I was like, "Oh, yeah." It went by super quickly. I feel like it flowed really nicely. I was definitely